This information is taken from the publication Inside the Legislative Branch by the Legislative Research Commission. The publication is available for download at this location. Legislative Sessions. Regular Sessions. The Constitution of Kentucky requires the General Assembly to meet in Frankfort every year on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in January. In even-numbered years, the session begins in January, with the number of legislative days of not more than 60, and ends no later than April 15. In odd-numbered years, Part 1, the organizational component, begins in January. Part 2 begins the first Tuesday in February. The number of legislative days is to be not more than 30. The session ends no later than March 30th. A legislative day is a calendar day with the exception of Sundays, legal holidays, and any day on which neither chamber meets.
Extraordinary, or special, sessions. Only the governor may call a special session and it may address only the subjects specified in the governor's call. Though only the governor may call a special session, it is the legislature that determines the process and decides when the session will end. Although there is no time limit on special sessions, they usually are brief. Districts. Kentucky follows a bicameral form of government consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Legislators are elected by the citizens of their designated legislative area, or district, to be their voice in government. The Constitution requires the General Assembly to divide the state into 38 Senate districts and 100 House districts as nearly equal in population as possible. The General Assembly must review the districts at least every 10 years and redivide them if necessary. Senators. The Constitution establishes terms and qualifications for legislators. A senator must be at least 30 years old, a citizen of Kentucky, and must have lived in the state at least 6 years immediately preceding an election. A senator must live in the district for at least 1 year prior to election. Senators are elected for 4-year terms, with half the Senate elected every 2 years. Representatives. A representative must be at least 24 years old, a citizen of Kentucky, and must have lived in the state for at least 2 years and in the district for 1 year prior to election. Representatives are elected for 2-year terms, with the entire House elected every 2 years.
Leadership. The leadership of the Senate and House are defined both by the Constitution and by the legislative traditions of the General Assembly. The Constitution requires that members of the Senate elect a president and that members of the House elect a speaker. The members of each chamber also elect a president pro tempore and a speaker pro tempore. The traditions of the legislature allow for the members to elect additional legislative leaders, floor leaders, caucus chairs, and whips, who are selected by their political parties' caucuses during the organizational phase of odd-year sessions. These leaders are responsible for seeing that the interests of their respective party caucuses are served. Constitutional officers. The Constitution also mandates a number of constitutional officers to carry out some of the clerical and support activities for the General Assembly. Among these are the chief clerks elected by each chamber. The clerks and their staffs, assisted by the staff of the Legislative Research Commission, are responsible for recording the minutes of each session, roll calls and votes, and bill calendars, recording committee assignments, certifying the passage of bills and resolutions, keeping equipment inventories, and keeping the official journal of each chamber. Clerks and LRC staff see that amendments are incorporated into bills before they go from one chamber to the other. They also make sure that final copies signed by the presiding officer in each chamber contain the exact wording approved by the Senate and House. The sergeants-at-arms clear unauthorized persons from the floor of the Senate and House before each session and as otherwise directed. They also clear the galleries if there is a disturbance.
The legislative process. Standing committees. Standing committees play a vital role in the legislative process. Both the House and the Senate are organized into separate standing committees to facilitate the most efficient use of time and resources while considering individual pieces of legislation. Each legislator is assigned to serve on at least one standing committee. These committees collectively may consider more than 1,000 pieces of legislation during a session and decide which should advance to the full Senate or House. In each chamber, the Committee on Committees assigns bills to one of its several standing committees. Assignments are determined by the subject of each bill. Rules adopted at the beginning of the session list the subjects that fall within each committee's jurisdiction. The Committee on Committees also selects the chair, vice chair, and members of each standing committee. The chair of each committee, in consultation with leadership, determines which, and in what order, bills will be considered. A committee may schedule a public hearing on the subject before acting on specific legislation. Supporters and opponents of a particular bill are often invited to address a committee. Committees may send bills to the full Senate or House for consideration with or without proposing changes, or amendments, to the bill. Bills also may be retained in the Senate or House committee. Approximately half the bills introduced each session never get out of committee.
Order of business. The exact order of business varies slightly between the Senate and the House of Representatives. The exact order of business is laid out in each chamber's official rules. Both chambers follow parliamentary procedure for conducting business. This is a typical day's chamber proceedings. Invocation. Each day begins with a prayer. At the beginning of each legislative session, resolutions are adopted inviting area ministers to offer the invocation. Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call. The clerk calls the roll to see if the constitutionally required number of members is present to conduct business. Reading and approval of the journal. A motion is usually made that the reading of the previous day's actions, the journal, be dispensed with and approved. Second reading of bills. Bills on the calendar are given their second reading, by title only, and sent to the Rules Committee. Report of committees. The clerk reads committee action on bills. First reading of bills. The Constitution requires all bills to be read on 3 separate days. These bills are read by title only. A favorable committee report constitutes the first reading of a bill. Bills that have received a first reading are placed on the calendar for the following day. Orders of the day. The Rules Committee posts legislation in the orders of the day. The majority floor leader calls bills from the orders of the day for debate, amendment, or other floor action. Third reading and passage of bills. It is usually the majority floor leader who makes a motion that a bill be given its third reading, by title only, to open the floor for debate on the bill. Motions, petitions, communications, and announcements. A member may present any matter he or she wishes to have considered that can be appropriately characterized as a motion, petition, communication, or announcement. Introduction and reading of new bills and resolutions. The clerk numbers bills and resolutions as they are received and reads new ones by title and sponsor. Bills and resolutions are identified by number throughout their consideration. Report of referrals of bills to committees. The clerk announces to which standing committees bills have been referred by the Committee on Committees. Adjournment. The presiding officer asks if there is any further business. If not, upon motion, the chamber adjourns. You can see these orders of business in action by watching the videos covering sample legislative days in the House and Senate.
Adjourning and convening. Each chamber decides individually every day it is in session when to adjourn and when to convene for the next working day. Chamber decorum. The rules of each chamber state that members are not to address each other on the floor by name. Senators must refer to each other as the senator from a particular county or district. House members refer to their colleagues as the gentleman or lady from a particular county or district. Senators address the presiding officer as Mr. or Madam President, and House members, Mr. or Madam Speaker. Members who use objectionable language on the floor may be called to order by the chair.
Bills. Only a member of the General Assembly can introduce legislation. Legislators, however, often introduce bills suggested by citizens or various organizations. Bills vary in length from a single paragraph to hundreds of pages. The Constitution requires that a bill relate to only one subject, which must be stated in the title. Bills that do not follow this rule may be ruled unconstitutional. The Constitution prohibits special laws applying to only one city, town, county, or person. All bills must begin with these words, "Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Kentucky." Some bills pass with few changes, or amendments, and little discussion. Others are subjected to intense examination and undergo major changes before becoming law. Amendments may be proposed by a committee or a legislator, but amendments must be approved by the full Senate or House before they are incorporated into the bill. If a committee changes a bill significantly, a committee substitute may be adopted. Once adopted, a committee substitute is considered as the original bill for purposes of further amendments. Bills are introduced after legislators deliver them to the Senate or House clerk. The following is the basic process a bill must follow to be enacted into law: the Kentucky Revised Statutes. Introduction and committee referral. A bill may be introduced in the Senate or House. However, a bill that raises revenue must be introduced in the House. Each bill is assigned a number, read by title and sponsor, and referred to a standing committee by the Committee on Committees. Committee consideration. Committee meetings are open to the public except when exempted by the Open Meetings Law. When there is sufficient interest in a subject, a public hearing may be held. A bill may be reported out of committee with one of the following expressions of opinion: favorable, favorable with committee amendments, favorable with committee substitute, unfavorable, or, in the Senate, without opinion. A committee can essentially kill a bill by failing to act on it. First reading. When a committee reports a bill favorably, the bill has its first reading and is placed on the calendar for the following day. Second reading, to rules. The bill is read by title a second time and sent to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee may recommit the bill, or send it back to a committee, or place it in the orders of the day for consideration. Third reading and passage. I move that House Bill 100 be taken from its place in the orders of the day, read for the third time by title only, and placed upon its passage. This motion, usually made by the majority floor leader, opens the floor for debate. Following debate and amendments, a final vote on the bill is taken. To pass, a bill must be approved by at least 2/5 of the members of the chamber, 40 representatives or 16 senators, and a majority of the members present and voting. If the bill contains an appropriation or an emergency clause, it must be approved by a majority of the members elected to each chamber, 51 representatives and 20 senators. During sessions in odd-numbered years, legislation that appropriates funds or raises revenue requires a 3/5 majority to pass, 60 representatives and 24 senators. Proposed constitutional amendments also require a 3/5 majority to pass. If you want to understand more about the constitutional requirements regarding legislation, please see the video series on the Kentucky Constitution.
What happens next? If a bill is defeated, that is the end of it unless two members who voted against it request it be reconsidered and the request is approved by majority vote. If a bill passes one chamber, it is sent to the other chamber, where it follows much the same procedure. Both chambers must agree on the final form of each bill. If either chamber fails to concur in amendments made by the other, the differences must be reconciled by a conference committee of senators and representatives. Compromises agreed to by this conference committee must be approved by both chambers. Enrollment. After passage by both chambers, a bill is presented for signature by the Enrollment Committee. The bill is signed by the presiding officer of each chamber and sent to the governor, or to the Secretary of State if a constitutional amendment. Governor's action. The governor may sign a bill, permit it to become law without signing it, or veto it. A veto may be overridden by a majority of the elected members of both chambers. Kentucky's governor must veto a bill in its entirety, except for an appropriations bill, for which the governor has line-item veto authority. The governor has 10 days, excluding Sundays, to act on a bill after it has been received. Becoming law. The Constitution specifies that an act becomes law 90 days after the General Assembly adjourns, unless the act contains a delayed effective date or an emergency clause. In the latter case, the act must be approved by a constitutional majority, half of the members elected, plus one, and becomes effective immediately upon its approval by the governor. The fastest a bill can pass through both chambers of the General Assembly and receive the required 3 readings in both chambers is 5 days. Most bills take longer to complete the process, however.
Resolutions and citations. In addition to bills, the General Assembly may express itself in resolutions or in citations. Simple resolutions require action by only one chamber and do not carry the force of law. They most often are used to express the sense of the chamber on a particular matter. Frequently, at the end of a day, the Senate or House will pass a simple resolution to adjourn in honor or memory of an individual or group. Concurrent resolutions adopted by both chambers generally are used to mandate specific legislative studies and to send messages to other branches of government. They also do not have the force of law. A joint resolution is used to ratify amendments to the U.S. Constitution, to direct an executive branch agency to conduct a study, or to approve other matters of temporary law not meant to be inserted in the statutes, such as naming roads and bridges. Joint resolutions have the force of law and must pass both chambers, be signed by the officers of each chamber, be sent to the governor, and be filed with the Secretary of State. Legislative citations can be presented by either chamber to recognize an individual or group. Because citations are honorary, they generally are not to be used for procedural, controversial, or partisan political matters.
Legislative Research Commission. The Legislative Research Commission was created in 1948 as a nonpartisan fact-finding and service agency. Under Chapter 7 of the Kentucky Revised Statutes, the Commission operates as the administrative and research arm of the General Assembly. The Commission also directs the business of the legislature between sessions of the General Assembly. The Legislative Research Commission is a 16-member statutory committee made up of the majority and minority party leadership of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House serve as co-chairs of LRC. The Commission employs a director who serves at its pleasure. The LRC director supervises the nonpartisan staff of the Commission and the General Assembly. The term Legislative Research Commission typically also is used to refer to legislative staff, which comprises 2 units, a larger nonpartisan staff and a smaller partisan staff. The nonpartisan professional support staff is hired by the LRC director and serves all 138 members of the legislature. Partisan staff serves the legislative leadership of either chamber and serves at their pleasure. The structural work of the Legislative Research Commission is performed by committees. Outside of standing committees during a legislative session, there are 3 types of LRC committees, which are also considered to be subcommittees of the Legislative Research Commission: interim joint committees, statutory committees, and special committees or task forces. These committees are staffed by LRC nonpartisan professional staff.
Interim joint committees. Interim joint committees are an important part of the legislative process. Many consider the establishment of the interim joint committee system as a major reason that the legislative branch has achieved co-equal status with the other branches of Kentucky state government. The period between legislative sessions is called the interim, and a great deal of legislative business continues at this time. During the interim, the individual Senate and House standing committees that were organized during the session meet together as interim joint committees. For example, the Senate Standing Committee on Appropriations and Revenue and the House Standing Committee on Appropriations and Revenue become the Interim Joint Committee on Appropriations and Revenue after a legislative session. The Interim Joint Committee system enables continued study and in-depth discussion of issues after a legislative session during the period leading to the next session. It lends a degree of continuity to the operation of the Kentucky legislature. An interim joint committee may prepare, review, and pre-file legislation. Pre-filed legislation is introduced on the first day of the next regular session and assists standing committees in becoming active immediately as that session begins. The legislative interim period has been defined statutorily to begin on June 1 and continue through December 1 of each year. Interim joint committee meetings are open to the public. The following is a list of the interim joint committees: Agriculture, Appropriations and Revenue, Banking and Insurance, Economic Development and Workforce Investment, Education, Health, Welfare, and Family Services, Judiciary, Licensing, Occupations, and Administrative Regulations, Local Government, Natural Resources and Energy, State Government, Tourism, Small Business, and Information Technology, Transportation, Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Protection.
Statutory committees. Statutory committees were established by the General Assembly to perform specific tasks related to oversight of the executive branch of state government. Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee. The Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee reviews regulations proposed by state administrative bodies. After review by the subcommittee, the Legislative Research Commission refers proposed regulations to an appropriate interim joint committee for further review. Capital Planning Advisory Board. The Capital Planning Advisory Board develops in each biennium a comprehensive statewide 6-year capital improvements plan and submits it to the heads of the 3 branches of government. The plan includes recommendations of projects to be undertaken or continued and recommendations as to priority and means of funding capital projects. The board is composed of 16 members appointed by the 3 branches of state government. Capital Projects and Bond Oversight Committee. The Capital Projects and Bond Oversight Committee monitors implementation of capital projects authorized by the General Assembly or by the committee through an interim review process. The committee reviews any cost overruns on authorized projects and receives quarterly reports from those agencies that manage capital projects. The committee also reviews all bonds issued by state agencies and school systems. Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Committee. The Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Committee reviews, analyzes, and provides oversight on child welfare issues, including foster care, adoption, and child abuse, neglect, and dependency. Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity. The Commission was established in 2021 to study and research issues where disparities may exist across the sectors of education equity, child welfare, health, economic opportunity, juvenile justice, criminal justice, and any other sectors that are deemed relevant in an effort to identify areas of improvement in providing services and opportunities for minority communities.
Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee. The Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee reviews administrative regulations and advises the Kentucky Board of Education concerning the implementation of the state system of assessment and accountability. The subcommittee also advises and monitors the Office of Education Accountability, which was established by the 1990 General Assembly's passage of the Kentucky Education Reform Act. Government Contract Review Committee. The Government Contract Review Committee reviews proposed state personal service contracts and memoranda of agreement to determine the need for the service, whether the service can be performed by state personnel, and the cost and duration of the contract. Medicaid Oversight and Advisory Committee. The Medicaid Oversight and Advisory Committee monitors the implementation of Medicaid within the Commonwealth, including access to services, utilization of services, quality of services, and cost containment. Legislative Oversight and Investigations. The Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee, formerly Program Review and Investigations, serves as the main investigative committee in the General Assembly. The committee has the discretionary power to review the operations of state agencies and programs, to determine whether funds are being spent for the purposes for which they were appropriated, to evaluate the efficiency of program operations, and to evaluate the impact of state government reorganizations. Public Pension Oversight Board. The Public Pension Oversight Board assists the General Assembly with its review, analysis, and oversight of the administration, benefits, investments, funding, laws, administrative regulations, and legislation pertaining to Kentucky retirement systems. Kentucky Retirement Systems encompasses the Kentucky Employees Retirement System, the County Employees Retirement System, and the State Police Retirement System. Tobacco Settlement Agreement Fund Oversight Committee. The Tobacco Settlement Agreement Fund Oversight Committee reviews each project being submitted to the Agricultural Development Board for funding from the Tobacco Settlement Fund. Special Committees, Task Forces. When necessary, the Legislative Research Commission or the General Assembly authorizes special committees or task forces to study a specific topic and report their findings, usually by a specified date during the interim, to LRC or to the General Assembly. As such, these committees are temporary in nature. After the study has been completed and reported, the special committee or task force ceases to exist.
LRC Nonpartisan Professional Support Staff. LRC employs a nonpartisan director who oversees a nonpartisan professional staff of bill drafters, committee administrators, analysts, and assistants, researchers, fiscal analysts, attorneys, economists, librarians, secretaries, computer technicians, and other trained specialists who provide a multitude of services for the General Assembly. The LRC nonpartisan staff also print bills, research reports, and informational bulletins in its print shop, maintain official legislative records and provide research materials in its legislative reference library, dispense information to the media and the public about the activities of the General Assembly and its members through its Public Information Office, and maintain a website for public access to the General Assembly. Functions of the LRC Nonpartisan Committee Staff. Major responsibilities of the LRC Committee staff are bill drafting, research, and committee meeting facilitation. Bill drafting. Nonpartisan LRC staff draft legislation at the request of any legislator. Bill draft requests are assigned to a member of the staff of the standing or interim joint committee that has jurisdiction over the subject matter of the request. Staff draft legislation both during legislative sessions for consideration in that session and during the interim periods between regular sessions for introduction at the next session. Research. A major responsibility of LRC is to research issues confronting lawmakers. These research tasks and projects can encompass any state program or policy and are completed by nonpartisan LRC staff at the request of the General Assembly, the Legislative Research Commission, an LRC subcommittee, or an individual legislator. Any resulting research reports and research memoranda are made available to the public at little or no cost. Research publications are among the holdings of the LRC Legislative Reference Library and also are available on the LRC website.
Committee meeting facilitation. There are 4 types of committees. Senate and House standing committees are creatures of the General Assembly and exist only during legislative sessions. Interim joint committees, statutory committees, and special committees or task forces are considered subcommittees of the Legislative Research Commission. LRC nonpartisan staff are assigned to and facilitate meetings for all of these types of committees. Meeting facilitation includes scheduling meetings and coordinating agendas in consultation with committee chairs, arranging testimony from witnesses, preparing background materials for use by committee members, and preparing and distributing committee reports and minutes. Budget review. LRC is directed by statute to study and examine the expenditures of state agencies. For this purpose, the Commission has a budget review staff that examines agency budgets, conducts fiscal studies, and provides data required for effective legislative review of budget proposals. During sessions of the General Assembly, budget review staff prepare fiscal notes on the cost implications of pending legislation. The principal function of this staff is to work with the Appropriations and Revenue Committees in formulating the state budget. Office of Education Accountability. The legislature established the Office of Education Accountability, OEA, in 1990 as part of the Kentucky Education Reform Act. OEA is under the jurisdiction of the Legislative Research Commission with oversight by its Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee, or EAARS. OEA is required to ensure that public schools operate efficiently and effectively. OEA also monitors the implementation of education reform throughout the state and reviews the state's system of school finance. OEA conducts studies relating to public education as directed by EAARS.